Don't you dream of touching Dad's 33 million? Sarah's voice sliced through the tranquil air of the vineyard. She stood in the middle of the gravel path, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were cold. Beside my daughter stood Ruth, my husband's mother, the woman the entire region once called by the gentle name, the elder Mrs. Porter. A small smile played on her lips, a smile so delicate it was cruel. "Calm down, my dear," she said, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder before turning to me. "Elaine, perhaps it's best you leave. Suncrest is no longer your place." A breeze rustled through the rows of St. Violet grapes, carrying the bittersweet scent of wine and the tang of rusted iron from old fermentation tanks. I could only stand and watch them, my husband's stepmother and the daughter I had raised for 28 years, standing on the same side of the battle line. And don't forget to subscribe to follow me on this journey. And now, let me tell you why we found ourselves in this heartbreaking situation. 6 weeks after Thomas's funeral, I received a summons from his lawyer, Mr. Winters. According to his final instructions, the reading of the will must take place at Suncrest. I had hesitated. Before he passed, Thomas had held my hand and whispered, "Don't go to Suncrest, Elaine. Promise me." But here I was, with a metal key engraved with Suncrest 1995 in my coat pocket, and a growing suspicion that every one of Thomas's warnings held a hidden reason. Winters opened the file, his voice low but clear. "According to the updated will, all ownership of Suncrest Vineyard, including the land, the St. Violet grapevines, and the Suncrest Foundation, belongs to Mrs. Elaine Porter." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "You're seizing it, aren't you? Ruth said Dad intended to leave Suncrest to the family foundation." I wanted to embrace my daughter, but Ruth's gaze stopped me cold. "Don't blame her," Ruth said, her voice as light as the wind. "Thomas was very weak, his memory confused. It's possible he signed the wrong document." I looked directly at her. Thomas was lucid enough to remember who once called him the unwanted son. Ruth's smile faded, but her eyes darkened. "You think you knew Thomas completely? If he were alive, he wouldn't let you set foot in this place." Those words pierced my chest. Not let me set foot in Suncrest. Why? Winters closed his briefcase, his voice a soft echo in the room. "There is a request for a temporary conservatorship of the assets, filed by Mrs. Ruth Porter. The court has not yet approved it, but for now, Suncrest remains in Mrs. Elaine Porter's name." I nodded, maintaining my composure, and that was why Sarah had screamed at me, telling me not to dream of touching Thomas's fortune before storming out, with Ruth following close behind. Before getting into her car, Ruth turned back, her smile as thin as a razor's edge. "The real family will soon take back what is rightfully ours." The iron gate clanged shut. The sound of the engine faded, leaving me alone amidst the vast land and the silent rows of grapes. I opened the package Winters had given me, a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was the key engraved with Suncrest 1995 and a handwritten card from Thomas. I clenched the key in my palm. The setting sun streamed through the leaves, casting a light on the rows of grapes, purple as clotted blood. Suncrest was holding something back, and Thomas, somehow, was still leading me toward it. That night, the smell of rain seeped through the wooden window frames, mingling with the scent of old paper in the living room. On the table, the key etched with Suncrest 1995 lay beside the brown paper package. I didn't open it right away. I wanted my hands to be steady when I touched Thomas's handwriting. Mr. Winters called. I answered on the second ring. To us, Winters was more than a lawyer. He was the man who had witnessed our vows at the town hall, who occasionally came for dinner and drank weak wine because doctor's orders, and whom Thomas used to call a talking grandfather clock, punctual, precise, and never promising what he couldn't deliver. In all the years I'd known him, I had never heard him say a word just to please someone. He was the kind of man I could trust. "Elaine," his voice came over the phone, low, thick, and as distinct as the sound of a pen signing a wooden cover. "You have Thomas's package, don't you? I believe He wanted you to read it when things were truly quiet. Yes, it's quiet now, I said, hearing my own voice trying to sound as sturdy as an oak barrel in a wine cellar. I hung up, sat straight, and pulled the twine. The brown paper unfolded, releasing a faint smell of old glue. Inside was a folded letter, a thin metal tag engraved with 1995, and a small note attached with clear tape, its corners rounded the way Thomas always did with things that could prick your fingers. On the note was his script, elegantly slanted, the pen strokes slow and deliberate. If Ruth shows up, don't be afraid. Go to Suncrest. Don't believe what you hear until you see it with your own eyes. I touched the words, "Don't be afraid." The blue ink was slightly blurred at the period. Thomas always wrote the word "don't" with such care, as if pressing every fear down onto the page. I opened the letter. "Elaine, if you're reading this, I have likely gone on ahead. I'm sorry for leaving behind so much silence. I forbade you from coming to Suncrest because it was the only way to keep you out of Ruth's trap. There is a very clever and very cruel temporary conservatorship clause related to Suncrest. The moment you set foot on the property, they could frame you as an interfering party, drag you into court, and trigger the option to sell Suncrest to a corporation that has been waiting in the wings. Then our legacy would be dismantled like a rotten wooden crate. I have changed the order of the clauses. When you arrive, that clause will become void if two things happen simultaneously. The legal owner is in actual residence at Suncrest, not inspecting, not visiting. The Suncrest Foundation is restructured with transparency, making it impossible to siphon funds. You don't need to run. You need to be in the right place at the right time. I will always be with you. P.S. When you see 1995, don't just glance over it. Hold it under the light of the wine. I put the letter down, took a breath, and let out a soft laugh through tear-filled eyes. It was so typical of Thomas, part schoolteacher hiding an exam, part husband who always remembered I loved solving puzzles in the evening. But then the laughter died. 1995. He had never told me the full story of that year. I turned over the old photograph I'd found that afternoon, a thin, frayed picture of a young Thomas standing next to a brown-haired woman. On the back, in a different handwriting, finer, softer, was the name Martha. I read the name several times, like a strange prayer. In my memory, Ruth had always been called Thomas's mother. I had never heard anyone mention a Martha at Suncrest. The silence around a name can sometimes be as loud as metal scraping against metal in the night. I called Winters back. "Do you know who Martha is?" I asked. On the other end, he paused for a few beats, long enough for me to hear the rustle of paper. "Elaine," he said slowly, "I never comment on a client's private life without permission, but Thomas left an instruction. When Elaine asks about Martha, tell her to see Lucia first. I'll text you the address. And one more thing." "Yes?" "Don't talk about 1995 on the phone. Ruth has people in Santa Rosa." His voice dropped. "This is no longer about feelings." I thanked him, hung up, and felt a chill spread through me, as cold as the rim of a crystal glass untouched by a warm hand. A year ago, the gas stove glowing blue, the faint scent of calming tea in the air, Thomas had confessed. No, not confessed. He had placed my hand on the truth, like setting a glass on a wooden coaster to keep it from wetting the table. "Elaine," he'd said, his eyes fixed on the grain of the wood, "I have early-onset Alzheimer's and a heart condition, the genetic kind I knew would come knocking sooner or later." I didn't cry. I picked up a pen, opened a notebook I'd bought at a small shop downtown, and wrote the first entry. "Illness. Make a plan." I was that kind of woman. And he had smiled, touching the words I had just written. "So we make a plan," I had said. He shook his head. "We make plans, they break them. Ruth doesn't win with logic, she wins with procedure. The more you step into her game, the more you play by her rules. So you want me to stand by and watch them dissect Suncrest? I want you to save your strength for the final move," he whispered. "I'll set the board." That night, He made me chamomile tea, in a thick, pale glazed mug I hated for its bitter aftertaste. He dropped in a sliver of orange peel. I looked at him. He remembered. The little things like that, he always remembered. What followed was a series of days I didn't fully comprehend. Thomas came and went as if on a private schedule with the sun. I thought they were trips to inspect the vineyard. Now I understood they were appointments with my future. He bought a small camera and placed it in a corner of his study. Every time I entered, he would cover it with a stack of books. "What are you recording?" I'd joked. "Proof that I'm a terrible cook?" He'd winked. "The choreography of memory." I didn't understand then. But now, sitting under the yellow lamplight, I opened the rest of the package and was beginning to understand Thomas's veiled meanings from a year ago. A thin memory card was tucked behind the cardboard flap. On its back was another note. Days 1 to 7. Only open when you feel you're calm enough. Thomas always spoke to me that way, never pushing, only inviting. I inserted the card into my laptop. The screen flickered. His face appeared, healthier than in his final days, a twinkle in his brown eyes, the bookshelf and the gray-shaded lamp I'd picked out at a flea market in the background. "Hello, Elaine," he said, as if he were standing in the kitchen. "If you're watching this, I'm probably no longer sitting across from you. I hate that. So I found a way to walk beside you for one more year in the only way I could." He tilted his head. "I've left 365 videos, a small clue each day, to show you where to go when the noise around you tries to lead you astray. Some days it will just be, drink some water, go outside for some air. Other days there will be a piece of paper, a number, a name." He held up a small, handwritten note to the screen. 1995, pipe room, cracked glass. "Don't be afraid of these words," he smiled. "They're just doors, and you love puzzles." Then his expression grew serious. "Ruth will use 2 weapons, the false sentiment of family and an emergency procedure called temporary conservatorship. She needs you to be impatient. Don't give her that." He leaned back, his eyes softening. "I know you hate the phrase, 'just wait.' I hate it too. But this time, waiting for the right moment means saving everything. When you get to Suncrest, stay, so you fall under the legal residence status, and at the same time, contact Winters to restructure the foundation. The 2 switches must be flipped at once." I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't just a plan. It was an act of faith. He trusted me to be calm enough to walk a legal tightrope as thin as a hair. The video paused for a few seconds. He bent down, as if placing something just out of frame, then held up a white note card. "One last thing. I've set up a series of secret boxes. Number 1 you're holding now. Number 2 has a cracked crystal glass, a sign that I want you to look more closely at beautiful surfaces. Number 3 is a bottle of the 95 Harvest. Don't drink it, send it to a lab. Number 4 is a USB drive with some illogical numbers from the foundation. Number 5 I've sent to Sarah. I told her things that, if I had said them while I was alive, she would have stormed out. Number 6 is a wooden key. The metal key opens the main gate. The wooden key opens the old doors." He touched the edge of the table, a habit whenever he was suppressing emotion. "I'm not leaving you to fight empty-handed. I'm leaving you with a light." The screen faded. I turned off the laptop and sat for a long time. Outside, the rain had stopped. The damp, metallic smell dissipated, replaced by the scent of paper warmed by the lamp. I called Winters again. "Tell me the truth," I began. "Where do you stand in all of this?" "In the middle," he answered immediately, "but never in the middle of something wrong. Thomas knew I would keep his signature intact, and I know who is trying to bend it." I told him what Thomas had said about the 2 switches. On the other end, Winters was silent for a moment, then said, "If that's true, Elaine, tomorrow morning we change your address on the residency filings and arrange a management contract to prove your stay is official. In the afternoon, I'll schedule an independent audit of the foundation. Ruth will retaliate. She'll say you're an outsider. You just need to live there and open the books. Let the numbers do the rest." I hung up and looked around the house. Everything suddenly felt small compared to the name Suncrest. I packed a single suitcase, a few sets of clothes, my notebook, the framed photo of us at Santa Barbara Beach, the wind blowing my hair across his face as he laughed with his eyes closed. I put the letter back in its envelope and placed it in the suitcase. Before zipping it, I added the 1995 metal tag and the Suncrest 1995 key to my coat pocket, the cold, real metal against my skin. Leaving the house, I locked the door with my left hand, as always. But as I turned the key, I realized, throughout our marriage, Thomas had rarely told me, don't. He usually said when and how. Prohibition was not in his nature. Protection was. The Santa Rosa night settled, quiet as a sleeping wine barrel. At the end of the street, a yellow light illuminated my license plate. I started the engine. This time, I wasn't going in search of money. I was going to find the rhythm my husband had set for me, as precise as the gavel's rap when truth is entered into the record. Tomorrow morning, I would return to Suncrest. Not to look and retreat, but to stay, to flip the two switches, and to see 1995 under the light of the wine. The morning at Suncrest broke with the scent of dew mixed with wine. A cold wind from the valley blew a familiar, damp, metallic smell against my cheeks, as if this place still remembered Thomas. The car stopped before the iron gate, the Suncrest Vineyard, Esta Sun 1948 sign tilting slightly in the wind. I took a deep breath, the key engraved with Suncrest 1995 in my hand. The metal was cold enough to sting. A woman emerged from the auxiliary buildings, her hair tied up, her brown jacket dusted with vineyard soil. "Mrs. Porter?" "Yes. And you are?" "Lucia Moreno. I've looked after this vineyard since Thomas came back to restore it. He told me that if you ever came, I was to open the cellar for you." Her voice was low and steady. No flattery, no fear. I recognized the kind of person Thomas had always valued, someone who quietly did what was right. We walked along the gravel path. Underfoot, dried purple grapes mingled with the sand, their bittersweet scent rising through the soles of my shoes. Lucia handed me another small key, engraved with O1, Office. "Mr. Thomas's study has been kept just as it was," she said. "I only dust it once a week." The room opened to light slanting through the blinds. Everything was frozen in the moment Thomas had left. A pen resting on a notebook, a glass with dried water spots, the smell of oak and resin hanging in the air. I ran my hand over the desk. In the sunlight, I saw a crystal glass placed askew, a crack as thin as a hair running down its side. A small note was tucked beneath its base. "Look under the St. Violet barrel, sample row." I bent down and opened the cabinet below the desk. The wood creaked, releasing a musty smell. Beneath the false bottom was another plank of a different color, with a small groove just large enough to pry up with a fingertip. I slipped a thin knife into the crack, a soft click, and the panel popped up, revealing a hard drive wrapped in a moisture-proof bag. On the label, day 130, password equals wedding date plus Elaine's maiden name. I smiled faintly. Thomas was still Thomas, clever, and never forgetting to turn a password into something only we would understand. I plugged the hard drive into my laptop. The screen lit up, showing a folder, 01, The Seed, 02, St. Violet, and 1995. I opened the first video. Thomas appeared, standing before a row of purple grapes, the wind gently tousling his hair. If you're watching this, it means you've found the cracked glass. Good. That glass was never meant to be thrown away. It cracked the night I was testing the first batch of wine after returning to Suncrest. When the light hit it, the crack reflected a thin, purple line, just like the veins on a St. Violet leaf. I thought, maybe everything beautiful has to have been broken once. I placed a hand on my chest. His voice was the same, warm, gentle, making everything around me slow down. The video cut to a new scene. Him in the wine cellar, his hand pointing to an old diagram. Suncrest, 1995, the year everything started to go wrong. My father died in a poisonous gas accident in a fermentation tank. The report said contamination, but no one ever rechecked the pipes. Ruth said it was God's will. I, for one, don't believe God uses ethylene glycol to kill people. I paused the video. Ethylene glycol. I'd heard of it. An ingredient in antifreeze. It was clear, odorless. A single drop was enough to ruin an entire batch of wine. Thomas reappeared, his voice lower. If anyone asks why I brought back the St. Violet, tell them it was for the flavor. But the truth is, I planted it to keep a secret. The aroma of St. Violet is so sweet, it can mask the taste of metal if someone adulterates the wine. The image flickered, then settled on his face, half in shadow, his eyes looking directly into the lens. When you arrive, don't touch the bottle of 95 Harvest. Let the lab do its work. And remember, don't be alone. I looked up to see Lucia standing in the doorway. Are you all right? I need a lab to test a bottle of the 95 Harvest. Lucia nodded. There's an old fermentation tank in cellar number 2. Mr. Thomas labeled it, "Do not open." Would you like me to get a sample? I'll go with you. We descended into the cellar. The air was cold, and the smell of charred wood seeped into my collar. The cellar was low, with a vaulted limestone ceiling and dim yellow lights. At the end of a row was an old tank, a handwritten label stuck to it. Harvest 1995, private. I touched it lightly. The wooden lid was damp and worn, but when I tilted my head, I saw a small scratch, as if someone had tried to open it, then stopped. Lucia took an unsealed bottle from a nearby wooden shelf. The wine was a translucent amber with a slight greenish tint. She swirled it gently, holding it up to the light. I've never seen a batch with this color, she said softly. The wine has aged, but the light in it looks younger. I took out the evidence bag I had brought and carefully poured a small sample. A California lab will identify the compounds. Do they still have records from 95? Lucia nodded. Mr. Thomas used to send samples every year. The bottles even have serial numbers. As I sealed the bag, my hand trembled slightly. The liquid inside sloshed as if it held the memories of an entire season. I labeled it Harvest 1995, Sample A, for verification, EP. That afternoon, I returned to the study. The sunlight streamed through the cracked crystal glass, projecting a thin purple line onto the wall, just as he said it would. I sat down and played the video for day 30. Thomas smiled gently. If you're seeing the purple light, it means you're in the right place. But don't forget, St. Violet only blooms in clean soil, and people only reveal their true faces when the earth is disturbed. I stopped the video, looked around the room, and then wrote in my investigation notebook. Discovery number 1, cracked crystal glass, hard drive, videos 130. Discovery number 2, bottle of Harvest 1995, sent to lab. Note, St. Violet ill sweet scent to mask metal. I closed the notebook and leaned my head back in the chair. In the quiet room, I could hear the wind whistling through the window frames, slipping through tiny cracks like someone whispering. Perhaps Thomas was still here, somewhere between the scent of grapes, wood, and iron. At noon, Suncrest was hotter than usual. A dry wind carried the smell of fermenting wine and burnt wood. I was signing the chain of custody form for the Harvest 1995 sample when I heard a car stop outside the gate. Lucia peeked in. There are 3 people waiting out there. What should I tell them? No need, I replied. I'll go out. The gate opened. 3 figures stepped out. Ruth, in a stylish gray dress. Sarah, her face tense and rigid. And a man in a gray suit holding a file. Ruth's personal lawyer. Ruth smiled, in that way of hers, a polite smile that only half concealed her intentions. Elaine, I'm so glad you're still here. I've come to take an inventory of the assets. It's just a formality. I looked her straight in the eye. I haven't received any official request from the court. Oh, that will be coming soon, she replied, her eyes flicking toward Sarah. I just want to ensure everything of Thomas's is being properly preserved. I saw Sarah's discomfort. She looked down, her voice small. I just want to make sure you're not doing anything reckless. Ruth said you might be being taken advantage of by others. My heart ached. The phrase "taken advantage of" was uttered so lightly, but it cut like a knife. I wanted to ask my daughter how many times she had heard those words, and from whose lips, but I held back. I hadn't come here to argue, but to see clearly. I opened the large doors leading into the living room. "Then come in," I said. "Suncrest doesn't turn away anyone who comes in the name of family." The room was as it had been, the smell of old wine, dust, and light slanting through the curtains. I noticed the small security camera Thomas had installed on the bookshelf. The indicator light was still on. A part of me was grateful he had thought of every possibility. Ruth set her bag on the table, opened her file, and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "This is the asset list and the proposal for temporary conservatorship. You can sign now to save the court some time." I sat down and scanned the lines of text. Each line was neat, precise, and as empty as the air in the room. I slowly shook my head. "I'm not signing anything until it's been reviewed by Mr. Winters." "Winters?" Ruth's lip curled. "That old man used to work for Thomas, didn't he? Now he works for you. Sometimes neutrality is just an illusion, Elaine." I offered a small smile. "I prefer the illusion of neutrality to the illusion of morality, Ruth." The remark hung in the air. Her lawyer glanced at her as if to intervene, but she raised a hand to stop him. Sarah looked up. "Dad always said family was something to be protected, so why can't you let Ruth help? She's his mother, after all." I looked at my daughter, slow and steady. "Have you ever seen your father's birth certificate?" Sarah froze. "Why are you asking such a strange question?" "I just want you to remember that anything can be retold." "But not everything that is retold is the truth," Ruth interjected, her voice as soft as mist. "Are you trying to plant suspicion in the child's mind? How despicable, Elaine. Thomas would have hated this." "Perhaps," I said. "But Thomas would have hated it more if someone twisted the truth to maintain control." Ruth stood up, her eyes glinting like steel. "You don't understand this family. If he had just listened to me that night, then no one would have had to die." The words slipped out, and even she knew she had said too much. I saw Sarah turn toward her, stunned. "What night?" I asked, my voice still calm. Ruth took a half step back, pressing her lips together. "I just meant, if Thomas had listened to his elders, my son wouldn't have thrown himself into that crazy project back in '95. Lucia entered, quietly placing a glass of water in front of me. But her eyes never left Ruth. She was the only other person here who knew that the project in '95 was the accident that had claimed Thomas's father's life. I stood up, gathering the remaining shreds of my control. "Your inventory list. I'll forward it to Winters for review. As for Suncrest, as of today, it is my legal residence. I am not going anywhere." Ruth stared at me, her eyes icy. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elaine. I'm just following the rhythm Thomas left for me." "Thomas, my son, so weak and easily led." I smiled. "He was smart enough to predict you would say those exact words today." The retort made Ruth stiffen. Sarah looked between us, then cried out, "Stop it! I can't take this anymore." She ran outside, her hands covering her face. Ruth turned to her lawyer. "We're leaving." Before exiting, she paused in the doorway and turned back. "Don't forget, Elaine, Suncrest has buried more people than it has grown grapes." The door slammed shut. The wind rushed past again, rattling the window panes like the angry breath of someone unseen. I sat alone. The light from the window fell across the table, passing through the cracked crystal glass. A thin purple streak swept across the tabletop, right where I had placed Martha's photograph yesterday. I picked it up and studied it for a long time. In the photo, the brown-haired woman smiled gently, her hand resting on young Thomas's shoulder. A hand with a small, crescent-shaped birthmark, a mark that Ruth did not have. I let out a slow breath. Everything was starting to fit together, piece by piece. 2 days after the confrontation, I sat in Thomas's old office, listening to the wind slip through the window cracks. On the desk, the bottle of Harvest 1995 sat in a small wooden box. The afternoon sun shone through the neck of the bottle, making the amber liquid inside glow with a faint blue-green edge. It was beautiful, unbelievably beautiful, and its beauty was precisely why I didn't trust it. Lucia knocked on the door. "The state lab confirmed they received sample A yesterday," she said. "They'll be in touch within the week. They said they've never seen wine with this particular hue." I nodded. "Good. Now let's send a second sample from the old fermentation tank itself. I want a control." Lucia looked at me with a mixture of concern and respect. Mr. Thomas must have planned for everything. When he was alive, I'd see him in the cellar every month, taking notes, sealing labels with his own hands. If anyone asked, he'd just smile. I replied slowly. He didn't leave a final wish. He left a procedure. She gave a small smile and left. The door closed, leaving me alone with the bottle of wine and my memories. I remembered the first time Thomas brought me to Suncrest. It was still neglected then. He stood in the middle of a dead vineyard and said, "You see, Elaine, this land is still breathing. You just have to listen." I had laughed. "Listen to the dirt?" He knelt, touching a dry vine. "You listen with faith, just like I have faith that you'll believe me." Now, watching the 1995 bottle cast a faint purple reflection on the ceiling, I understood. Thomas was never talking about the wine. He was talking about the evidence. I played the next video on the hard drive. On screen, Thomas was in the cellar, wearing a dark turtleneck sweater, surrounded by wooden barrels labeled Saint Violet. "Elaine, today is day 37. I'm reviewing the logbooks from 1995. They called it a gas leak, but the metrics don't add up. If it were CO2, the concentration in my father's blood would have been different. But the report noted swelling in his liver. Only one thing causes that: ethylene glycol." He looked into the camera, his voice dropping. "It's clear, odorless, with a slightly sweet taste. Some people use it in cheap wine to improve the texture, but just a little is lethal." I felt the air in the room grow colder. I thought of Ruth, of what she had said the other day. If Thomas had just listened to me that night. What night was that? An argument? A plan? Or a crime? I called Winters. "Can you find the inspection records for me from 1995? "Elaine," he said, "I'm afraid those files are sealed, but I can ask a contact at the state lab in California to do a search. I just need to know if any other samples from that year exist." "All right, but be careful. Ruth doesn't just have lawyers. She has a network." I exhaled. "I'm not afraid anymore, Winters. I just need facts." In the afternoon, I walked through the vineyard. The ground was dry, but every time I bent down, I could hear the wind whistling through the vines, like the stifled breath of someone long gone. I stopped in front of cellar number 2, where Lucia said there was a scratch on the tank lid. Yellow light streamed through the cellar door, illuminating the mark on the wood, like a fingerprint left by someone trying to keep a secret. I opened the cellar, took out a second bottle. At the bottom, a faded signature. T.P. Thomas Porter. He had signed the evidence itself. That night I sat writing in my investigation journal. Day 5. Harvest, 1995. Irregularities. Wine has a bluish tint. Unnatural aging signs. Suspected E.g., ethylene glycol. Awaiting lab results. Ruth's slip of the tongue about the night of 95. Possible direct involvement. I closed the notebook and looked outside. In the dark, the light from the cellar cast a glow on the ground, like a candle in a church. There was something in the air that made me feel Thomas was very close, not as a ghost, but as someone watching me execute his plan perfectly. The next morning, the landline rang. On the other end was a young, decisive male voice. "Hello, this is David Lee, a technician from the California State Laboratory. I'm calling about sample harvest 1995, sample A. We have preliminary results." I stood up, gripping the receiver. "Go on." "We detected traces of ethylene glycol just as you suspected. The level is 13 times higher than the natural threshold." I closed my eyes. "Are you sure?" Absolutely. And there's something else unusual. The concentration is uniformly stable at the bottom, which indicates it was mixed in at the beginning of the fermentation process, not from cross-contamination later. I sat down, my heart pounding. The room was dead silent. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Please send the official report to my lawyer, Mr. Winters. I want a state-certified confirmation. I'll do that right away, but if I may ask, is there anything else you'd like us to check? I thought for a moment. Check if any other samples from 1995 show similar traces. Same grape variety, same region, same chemical supplier. I understand. We'll look into the old records. When I hung up, I looked out the window. On the desk, the cracked crystal glass reflected a pale blue light, the same hue as the wine in the Harvest 1995 bottle. Both bore a beautiful wound. I called Lucia. Lucia, lock up all the 1995 cellars. No one is allowed in. Put new locks on and keep the second key for me. Is something wrong, Mrs. Porter? No, Lucia, it's just, I want to keep the truth in its purest state before someone tries to dilute it again. Lucia was silent, then replied, I understand. I once heard Mr. Thomas say, when they want to cover up a leak, they add flavor to the wine. I smiled faintly. He was right. That evening, as I was filing some papers, the phone rang again. I picked it up. It was David Lee, his voice lower this time, more urgent. Mrs. Porter, we cross-referenced it with an old case, the Suncrest Incident 1995. Your sample and the sample from that file are a 99.4% match, and... He paused. A copy of the chemical order from that time bears an authorizing signature from the office of Ruth Porter. I stood frozen. The entire room suddenly felt cold, as if all the warmth had been sucked out. Are you sure? I'm faxing it over now. The original is archived at the Industrial Chemicals Department in Sacramento. I hung up and sat in silence. On the desk, the bottle of wine shimmered with a blue glint. It wasn't just wine. It was a witness. That afternoon, the sun over Suncrest was a piercing yellow. The dry grapevines trembled in the wind, making a crackling sound like burning embers. The lab report was still on my desk, 4 pages thick, every word cold and brutally precise. Ethylene glycol concentration, 13.2x above threshold. The number didn't lie, but it didn't say who. Winters called. Elaine, I've found a name. Patrick Porter, Thomas's half-brother. He lives quietly in Auburn, north of Sacramento. He used to be the stock manager at Suncrest, and he's Ruth's son. Ruth's son? I asked, my heart sinking. Yes, he grew up at Suncrest too. Thomas sent him money for years. They had an unspoken connection. I nodded, my voice low. I'll go. Elaine, Winters hesitated. This man has lived his entire life in fear of Ruth. If you want the truth, tread softly. Auburn was a small town, the air thick with the smell of pine and resin. I found Patrick's wooden cabin at the end of a gravel road, an old porch, a rusty sign that read, "No visitors." I knocked twice. A man in his late 30s, his black hair streaked with gray, opened the door a crack. His eyes were wary, then they widened when he heard my name. I'm Elaine Porter, I said, Thomas's wife. He was silent for a moment, then opened the door wider. Come in. The coffee's cold. Inside, the scent of burnt coffee mingled with old paper. On the wall were black and white photos of Suncrest in its early days, and one in particular caught my eye. A woman with soft brown hair and gentle eyes, holding a young boy. In the corner, written in pencil, Martha, 1989. I lightly touched the wooden frame. How long have you had this picture? Patrick sat down, a faint, troubled smile on his face. A long time. My father told me a lot about her, said that without Martha, Suncrest would never have become what it was. I never met her, but as a kid, I used to hide under the stairs and listen to them talk about the smell of the St. Violet soil, something only Martha knew how to preserve. Later, when Ruth forbade anyone from even mentioning her name, I understood. Some names frighten people because they can't be erased. I looked around the simple room, filled with old mementos. Thomas never spoke about his birth mother. Just once he called her the old light. I didn't understand. Patrick gave a slight nod. My father called her that too. He said Martha was the first light of Suncrest. And then in 1995, that light went out completely when he died. He stood, opened a wooden cabinet, and took out a brown leather notebook, its edges worn. My father's. I've kept it since I left Suncrest. Ruth never knew it existed. I opened it. The handwriting was shaky but clear. RG95, EG, pressure variance, chemical record. Below was a diagram of valves and pipes with a final line, test run, not approved. I looked up. RG95? Patrick answered, his voice slow, enunciating every word. Reserve grape, 1995, a special test batch. Back then, Ruth, my mother, was the financial secretary. My father was in charge of engineering. She pushed him to approve a new, heat-stabilizing chemical to improve the wine's shelf life. My father objected, saying it hadn't been tested enough. But Ruth said if he didn't sign, Suncrest would lose a major contract, and bank debt would pull the whole family under. In the end, he signed. He looked out the window as rain began to fall, pattering on the tin roof. That night, my father went down to the cellar to check on things because he saw the pressure in a secondary pipe was off. The next morning, they called it a gas leak. The internal report cited an industrial accident, but I remember the smell. It was sweet, unpleasantly sweet. It wasn't until much later that I learned it was ethylene glycol. He clenched his fists, his voice thick with emotion. He was going to call the police. Ruth stopped him. She didn't shout, she just said, "Think of Patrick. Do you want your son to carry the Porter name or the shame of his father?" My father fell silent. A month later, he had a heart attack. Maybe it was his health. Maybe it was the guilt. I don't know. But from that day on, I understood. Silence was the first inheritance Ruth gave me. I turned to the next page. There was Ruth's signature, steady and cold. Chemical supplier, EG Comp, approved by R. Porter. Patrick took a deep breath. Thomas knew about this. I met him once when he was in his 30s. He came looking for me, handed me an envelope, and said, "Keep Father's notebook safe. If someday someone asks, give it to them." I didn't understand then, but I do now. I looked at him. "Are you afraid of her?" "It's more than fear," he said quietly. "She's my mother, and I'm also the only living proof that she is no longer the person my father once married." I stood and walked over to the photograph of Martha. The rainy light streamed through the window, illuminating her eyes in the picture, calm, sad, but warm. "Patrick, I need to keep this notebook. I'll have it copied and send the original to state investigators." He nodded. "If it helps make Suncrest as clean as she would have wanted, then take it." I folded the notebook and put it in my file. Outside, the rain grew heavier, each drop on the tin roof like the rhythmic beat of a slow confession. On the drive back to Suncrest, I turned on the radio. Patsy Cline's husky, warm voice filled the car amidst the sound of the rain. A flash of lightning illuminated the words embossed on the notebook's cover. RG95, EG, test run not approved. Those 3 phrases seemed seared into my mind. I remembered Thomas's words in the video. "When you see the purple light, it means you're in the right place." Outside, lightning streaked across the sky, its light reflecting off the wet grapevines, flashing a pale purple, the color of St. Violet, the color of truth. Back at Suncrest, I made an entry in my investigation journal. Day 8, Patrick, Martha, 1995. Martha equals Thomas's birth mother. Porter Sr., Eol's father of Thomas and Patrick, died in RG95 incident. Ruth equals second wife, Patrick's birth mother. Patrick has Porter Sr.'s notebook detailing RG95 EG. Ruth's authorizing signature is real. Financial motive and cover-up of 1995 crime is clear. I put down my pen, listening to the wind howl through the window frames. Perhaps the truth was still knocking, slow and persistent, like rain on a tin roof. 3 weeks after meeting Patrick, I received the fourth package, a small box wrapped in brown paper, the corner sealed with red wax bearing a faded imprint. TP, Suncrest. My heart tightened. Thomas had even planned for me to reach this stage. Inside was a sleek black USB drive and a thick envelope containing bank statements for the Suncrest Foundation. His handwriting on a small note read, "If you're reading this, it means you're ready. Don't be afraid to look at the money trail. It tells the truth more honestly than people do." I plugged the USB into my laptop. A single folder appeared. Foundation, Transfers, Porter Holdings. The files were organized by month, spanning 10 years. I opened 2018. The numbers jumped off the screen. $3.4 million transferred quarterly from the Suncrest Foundation to Porter Holdings Limited, beneficiary Ruth Porter. I felt my throat go dry. Porter Holdings was Ruth's private company. Thomas had once dismissed it as a temporary investment firm to manage the family fund. But why was a charitable foundation funneling money into it for a decade? I called Winters. "You once said the foundation was independent, correct?" "That's right, state-chartered, with its own board of auditors." Then why was over $3 million a quarter being transferred to Porter Holdings? The line was silent for a few seconds. "Elaine, if this is true, it's misappropriation of public trust funds. But I need original evidence. Bank statements with official seals, not copies. I have Thomas's USB and his scanned statements, which have the seals. I'll send them to you. Don't email them. I'll come to Suncrest on Thursday. And, if you can, contact Detective Hayes. He's the only one who ever looked into the Foundation's financials." That evening, I found another file on the USB drive. At note warfolder.txt. It contained only 4 lines. If they find a way to put the foundation into temporary management, the option to sell Suncrest will be activated. The war folder is the plan to stop that. Don't give Ruth time to file for conservatorship. Everything you need is in the 2015 folder. Option clause. I opened the 2015 folder. A contract appeared. Option to acquire Suncrest Vineyard, conditional. Signed between Porter Holdings and Fletcher Group Investments. Clause 4.3 stated clearly, "In the event the legal operator of Suncrest Vineyard is placed under court-appointed temporary conservatorship, the right to purchase the entire property shall be activated within 30 days." I caught my breath. If Ruth had successfully filed for temporary conservatorship on the grounds of Thomas's mental incompetence, late-stage Alzheimer's, before he died, the whole of Suncrest would have fallen into the hands of the Fletcher Group. And now, if I was deemed unfit to manage, history could repeat itself. Thomas had known. He had built an entire war folder to prevent it. I carefully printed out each copy, placing them in plastic sleeves. With every sheet of paper I pulled, I could feel Thomas's hand, meticulous, cold, but filled with love. He knew I didn't believe in conspiracies, but I believed in evidence. By the time I closed the laptop, it was dark. The light from the porch streamed through the cracked crystal glass, casting a thin, purple streak on the wall. That light was no longer a symbol of sadness. It was a signal. The next morning, Lucia ran in, phone in hand. "Mrs. Porter, someone is here to see you," from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department. A tall, middle-aged man in a gray shirt walked in. His eyes were deep and calm, the kind of man who observed more than he spoke. "Elaine Porter?" "That's me. I'm Detective Hayes. I was in charge of the financial investigation into the Suncrest Foundation back in 2019. Mr. Winters called me." I nodded and handed him the envelope of statements. Hayes sat down, put on his glasses, and reviewed each page. His voice was low and steady. "These aren't forgeries. They have the state audit seals. The transfers were all labeled under the code Fund Reallocation Research Program, but no such research program was ever reported. Porter Holdings has withdrawn a total of $136 million over 10 years. I sat in silence. $136 million. Hayes continued. Thomas contacted me in his last year. He mentioned a war folder, but he never got the chance to provide it. It seems he left it to you. He did, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I have the original USB. He anticipated Ruth would use the foundation as a money laundering tool to seize Suncrest. Hayes nodded slowly. I believe it. I've seen similar cases. The smartest criminals never murder people. They just murder the paperwork. We sat for the entire afternoon, piecing together the money trail, cross-referencing dates. April 2015, Thomas is hospitalized. Ruth files for temporary conservatorship. May 2015, Porter Holdings signs the option contract with the Fletcher Group. June 2015, the foundation makes its first major transfer to Porter Holdings. It all fit together like clockwork. Thomas had discovered it and withdrawn the conservatorship petition, but he didn't go public. With his heart condition, he feared he wouldn't have the strength for a court battle. Instead, he left this USB drive and the instruction, "Don't be afraid of the money trail." Hayes said, "We need to authenticate this chain of statements. I'll request a temporary freeze on the foundation's assets within the next 24 hours. You can expect retaliation from Ruth, but now the law is on your side." I nodded, feeling my heart beat stronger. For the first time, I was no longer just a widow seeking answers. I was becoming an investigator for the deceased. That night, I opened the video for day 120 on Thomas's hard drive to see if he had said anything about the foundation. The screen lit up. Thomas was in his office, his eyes shadowed with fatigue, his voice slow. "If you're watching this video, Ruth has probably filed for temporary conservatorship. Don't panic. Find Hayes. I believe in numbers, and I believe in you. You once asked me why I recorded every day, every transfer file, because I knew that where there is money, there is a crime." I gently touched the screen, his voice echoing in my heart. Now I understood. The war folder wasn't just a collection of documents. It was the legal key to winning back justice for Martha, for Porter Sr., and for Thomas himself. The next morning, Ruth called. Her voice was cold and clipped, as if she were reading from a script. "Elaine, I hear you've been digging into the foundation." "Be careful. I wouldn't want the court to see you as mentally unstable." I replied slowly, "Thank you for the advice, but if you truly want to protect Suncrest, I suggest you stop all transfers from the foundation immediately." There was a brief silence. Then Ruth laughed, a sound as light as a blade skimming skin. "Don't forget, I was running Suncrest long before you ever set foot in this house." "Yes," I said, "and now every dollar from those years is about to be audited." I hung up. I looked out at the vineyard. The rain had stopped. The morning light shone through the cracked crystal glass on my desk, casting a brilliant purple line on the wall. I wrote in my investigation journal, "War folder, activated. Detective Hayes, confirmed statements are real. Ruth, retaliating with psychological tactics. Prepare legal defense." The next day, Suncrest was as still as if holding its breath after a storm. Low, thick clouds hung in the sky, and the scent of fermenting grapes lingered in the air. I sat at my desk, my hand resting on the fifth package, a small box wrapped in blue cloth, bearing a single line of Thomas's script. "For Sarah. Let her read it when she's ready." Ready. It was a word Thomas often used when speaking of our daughter. He knew Sarah was strong, but he also knew that strength could easily be misdirected without an anchor. I looked at the box for a long time, then picked up the phone. Sarah arrived that afternoon. She was thinner, a weariness shadowing her face. Dressed in a dark coat, she stood in the doorway like someone caught between two worlds. "I can only stay a few minutes," she said, her voice cold. "Grandma, she told me I shouldn't come." "I know," I replied, "but this is from your father, not from me." Those words made her eyes flicker. I placed the box on the table and gently pushed it toward her. The last package your father sent for you. I haven't opened it. The only clue he left me was the code, your birthday. Sarah was silent. Then she keyed the numbers into the small electronic lock. 0524. Click. The box opened. Inside was a folded, handwritten letter and a silver USB drive engraved with day 210 for Sarah. She picked up the letter, her hand trembling slightly. I stepped back, giving her space. Sarah read aloud, her voice soft, but I heard every word. My daughter, when you read these words, I may no longer be there to explain everything. I don't need you to believe anyone right away. I only ask you to look. You always said Ruth understood you, while your mother was just silent. But silence is a language too, Sarah. People are silent when they want to protect others from something they aren't ready to face. There are truths I kept from you, not out of fear, but because I wanted you to be old enough to understand without hating. Please watch this video. It's not about money and it's not about Suncrest. It's about what truly remains when everything else is gone. Dad. Sarah opened the USB and plugged it into the laptop. The screen lit up. Thomas appeared. His face was thin, but his eyes were warm, and he sat in an old wooden chair in his study. He smiled, a gentle expression, like someone trying to hide the pain in his chest. Sarah, if you're watching this, you're probably angry with your mother, I understand, because I was once angry with her in the same way, when I thought she was taking away my freedom. But sometimes, what binds people isn't love. It's the fear of losing each other. I was afraid, so I stayed silent. I once signed papers allowing Ruth to manage the foundation. The very next day, I discovered the option clause contract. When I tried to nullify it, she said, "Think of Sarah. If her father is deemed incompetent, who will take care of her?" I understood then. It was a blow aimed not at me, but at you. He paused, looking directly into the camera. My daughter, Ruth, has always known that people's weakness is their love. She uses it. I don't want you to be manipulated by what you mistake for care. Remember, kindness isn't always warm. It can be chilled by calculation. The image wavered slightly. Then Thomas continued, his voice deeper. Do you remember when you were little, you ran around the vineyard and asked me, "Are St. Violet grapes really purple?" I told you, no, their color changes with the light. You laughed and said, "Then they must be very sad, Daddy." I want you to remember that. The truth is like that, too. It changes color depending on who is looking at it, but no light, no matter how it shines, can erase its roots. He leaned forward, gently stroking a family photo of the three of us, and then spoke his last words in a near whisper. When you are in doubt, don't ask who is right. Ask who is real. The screen went dark. Sarah sat motionless. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks, falling onto the edge of the letter. I walked over and sat across from her. Your father never blamed anyone. He just left clues. For both of us. Sarah looked up, her voice trembling. I don't know who to believe anymore, Mom. That's okay. Trust takes time. Just don't rush to hate yourself for trusting the wrong person. She broke down, sobbing, trying to hold it back, but failing. I didn't hug her. I just rested my hand on the table, close enough for her to know I was there. After a while, Sarah asked, her voice hoarse, When did Dad know what Ruth was doing? He began to suspect after his father died in 1995, I said slowly. He gathered pieces of the puzzle until his illness progressed, and he knew he was running out of time. He left everything in these packages and in that video for you. Sarah looked at me, her eyes red but clearer now. I want to see everything from the beginning, she said, from the first package. We sat together for the rest of the afternoon, watching the old video clips one by one. The light outside faded, seeping through the window in a pale purple streak, the color of St. Violet. Sarah didn't speak, just took notes, her handwriting shaky. I knew that in her mind, a world was collapsing and being rebuilt at the same time. Her image of her father, of Ruth, of me. And that was good. Because truth doesn't arrive through arguments. It arrives in the silent moment between two breaths. When I walked her to the door, Sarah paused on the steps. "Mom," she said, using the word for the first time in months. I remember the smell of St. Violet wine. Sweet, but with a bitter finish. Dad said the bitterness is what made it real. I smiled faintly. "And you are too, Sarah." She managed a weak but genuine smile. Then she got in her car and drove away. I returned to the desk, opened my investigation journal, and wrote, Day 9. Sarah, package number 5. Thomas's video and letter. Indirect evidence confirming foundation manipulation. Sarah begins to doubt Ruth. Emotion, compassion, not hatred. Need to protect Sarah before Ruth retaliates. The night wind blew through the window, rattling the cracked crystal glass. A sliver of purple light fell across Thomas's old photograph, right on his eyes. I smiled, feeling a moment of peace in the midst of the chaos for the first time. 3 days after Sarah left Suncrest, the phone rang at 6 a.m. Detective Hayes's voice was low and firm. "Elaine, I need to see you immediately. We've just found what Thomas called the pattern." The Sonoma County Sheriff's Department was on a quiet street, a gray building with no large sign. Hayes led me into a records room. On the table were 3 thick brown folders marked with red labels. 1995, Suncrest. 1997, Crestfield. 2001, Glenwood. All of them were ruled as gas leaks in a wine cellar, he said, pulling a report from the first folder. The victim was Porter Sr., 1995. I requested an order to exhume the original preserved samples. I looked at him, surprised. After nearly 30 years, is there anything left to analyze? Hayes gave a faint smile. Yes, the State Forensics Lab archives liquid samples in their chemical safety records. And the results are... He pushed a newly printed sheet of paper toward me. The text ran across the page. Ethylene glycol concentration detected. Identical chemical signature to 2015 Suncrest sample. I felt my heart drop. 2 decades, the same compound, the same supplier, the same result. Hayes continued. And here's the interesting part. All 3 wineries, Suncrest, Crestfield, and Glenwood, had received funding from a single source, the Porter Foundation, and the accounting address for the foundation at that time was the same place. He opened his laptop and pointed to the screen. A black and white photo appeared, a younger Ruth Porter in a business suit signing a document titled E.G. Comp Chemical Supply, Purchase Authorization. I let out a soft breath. She used the same chemical supplier for 10 years? Not just used, Hayes said. She co-founded E.G. Comp under a different name, R. Green. We just verified it through Delaware corporate records. R for Ruth. Green was her maiden name. I was stunned. Another link in the chain snapped shut. Ruth hadn't just manipulated the finances. She had created the entire criminal supply chain. Hayes looked at me, his voice low. Thomas knew. He sent me an email in 2019. Subject line, E.G. Comp, 1995 link. But by the time I went to see him, he was hospitalized. I was met only by Ruth's assistant, who told me Thomas had lost his mind and no longer remembered anything. I closed my eyes. She did that to all of us, used his illness as a shield. Hayes nodded slightly. And now we're going to strip it away. That afternoon, I accompanied him to the state crime lab. The forensic analyst, a woman named Parker, presented the samples. The 1995 sample shows traces of ethylene glycol at a low level, enough to cause asphyxiation if inhaled in a confined space. The molecular structure is a 99.8% match to the Harvest 1995 wine sample you sent. The signs of deliberate addition to a pressure testing solution are very clear. Hayes asked, "Could this be called poisoning?" Parker looked at him, her expression serious. If it happened in a sealed cellar and the deceased had a pre-existing heart condition, then yes, this was a murder disguised as an accident. We left the lab in silence. Outside, the evening fog was rolling in, the damp, metallic smell clinging to my coat. I remembered Thomas once saying, "Justice isn't a flash of light, it's the steady drip of water in the night." I asked Hayes, "What do we do now?" "Prepare the file to request a reopening of the 1995 case. I'll need your testimony and Patrick's." "Patrick will testify. He has his father's journal with the valve diagrams." "Perfect. I'll ask the state attorney's office to get involved. When Ruth receives the subpoena, she will strike back." The retaliation came sooner than we expected. That night, a reporter called. "Mrs. Porter, we have a tip that you're planning to sue your former mother-in-law for murder. Ruth Porter says you are unstable and fabricating stories after the loss of your husband. Do you have a comment?" I paused for a few seconds, then replied, "No, I am not fabricating anything. I am simply rereading what she herself once wrote." "What do you mean by that?" "I'll let the court answer that question." The next morning, Sarah arrived at Suncrest, holding a newspaper. "She's calling you a delusional widow. I can't stand it anymore." I smiled faintly. "You don't have to stand it. You just have to stand firm." Sarah sat down and opened her laptop. "I've been cross-referencing the money transfers. Every year she used the research fund excuse to withdraw money. But in one year, 1995, there was a huge spike in cash flow right before Grandpa's accident." I looked at my daughter. "You found it?" Sarah nodded. "Dad left clues for both of us." Hayes walked in at that moment. "Good. You both need to be equally strong. Ruth will use the media to attack your character, but the law is on our side now." He placed a thick file on the table, its red cover stamped, "State Attorney, Case Reopened." The Suncrest 1995 case has been officially reopened. We have 72 hours to submit additional evidence. That night, I sat alone in Thomas's old office. A half-full glass of St. Violet cast a purple glow on the wall. I replayed the video for day 150. Thomas was sitting in the garden, the wind blowing through his hair. "Elaine, if you're seeing Hayes, tell him. Justice doesn't have to be fast, it just has to be durable. I used to think silence would keep the family together. But then I realized some truths have to be spoken, even if they shatter the whole clan." I paused the video, a tear rolling down my cheek. Not of sadness, but because finally we were doing what he had wanted. We were breaking the silence. 2 days later, Hayes called me to the county courthouse. He was carrying a thick envelope. "Confirmed evidence," he said. "E.G. Comp was founded by Ruth, and the accidents all occurred at times when the foundation was investing in those wineries. She collected on insurance and stock shares." I looked at the files, the numbers screaming in the silence. Hayes closed the folder, his voice even. "Elaine, do you realize? She wasn't killing for money. She was killing to keep her story from ever changing." As I left the courthouse, the sunset washed over Suncrest. The rows of grapes glowed purple, still and silent. Sarah was standing on the hill, the wind pulling her hair back, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Dad used to say," she whispered, "that all light eventually changes color." "Yes," I replied, "but the truth doesn't." That morning, a white mist blanketed the vineyard hills of Suncrest. I wore a long gray coat and carried the leather-bound journal Thomas had once used as I stepped out of the house. Lucia was waiting by the car. "Is everything ready, Mrs. Porter?" I nodded. "Just one more thing to do." I looked back at the vineyard. The St. Violet vines were damp with dew, their purple hue muted. "Thomas," I whispered, "today you will be heard." The Sonoma County courtroom was bright and cold, with straight-backed wooden benches and an air thick with the smell of fresh ink and old coffee. At the plaintiff's table, Ruth sat upright in a cream-colored suit, a demure smile on her face. Beside her was her lawyer, Henderson, known for his sharp, cold demeanor. I sat on the other side next to Detective Hayes, Patrick, and Sarah, who was now firmly on my side. Judge Joan Keller, her silver hair pulled back, wearing black-rimmed glasses, struck her gavel. The preliminary hearing for the Suncrest Foundation case is now in session. The objective is to determine the legality of the temporary conservatorship request filed by Mrs. Ruth Porter, and to verify the authenticity of the related financial and criminal allegations. Henderson stood first. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Ruth Porter, only wishes to protect her family's assets from the interference of a mentally unstable widow. Mrs. Elaine Porter has recently become obsessed with conspiracy theories, accusing my client of murder, foundation manipulation, and document forgery, all without basis. He turned to me, his gaze cold. We have medical records confirming that Mrs. Porter was prescribed antidepressants following her husband's death, evidence of her instability. A murmur went through the room. I lifted my head, my voice calm. Yes, I took medication. For the grief of losing my husband, not for delusions. Hayes gently placed a hand on mine, signaling me to wait. The defense requests to submit evidence, he said, rising. This includes the State Forensics Lab report on the Harvest 1995 wine sample containing ethylene glycol, financial records confirming illegal transfers from the foundation to Porter Holdings, the 2015 option clause contract proving the motive to seize Suncrest, and the 1995 engineering logbook of Porter Sr., bearing the original signature of Ruth Porter. Judge Keller nodded. Admitted for review. Ruth leaned forward, her smile faint. Detective Hayes, she said sweetly, you are reconstructing the past from 30-year-old fragments. Do you have any direct evidence? Hayes replied, yes. The ethylene glycol signature in the 1995 sample matches the chemical structure of the 2015 sample confirmed by the state lab. Furthermore, 2 other wineries, Crestfield and Glenwood, suffered similar accidents, both of which received funding from the foundation while under your management. Henderson interjected, Objection. Speculation and comparison do not prove a crime. We move to have this all dismissed. The judge struck her gavel. Objection overruled. You may proceed. Patrick was called to the witness stand. He stood tall, his voice trembling slightly but clear. I am Patrick Porter, the biological son of Ruth Porter and the half-brother of Thomas Porter. My father died in the gas leak of 1995. I still have his notebook. In it, he clearly wrote RG95, EG, not approved. The signature approved by R. Porter is my mother's. Henderson raised an eyebrow. What proof do you have that this death was not an accident? Patrick looked him straight in the eye. None, except for the smell. The sweet smell I smelled in the cellar that day. It wasn't until much later that I learned it was ethylene glycol, and I have never forgotten it. The courtroom was silent. Ruth closed her eyes for a moment, her smile strained. Sarah was called next. She wore a white blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, her voice a little shaky but full of weight. I am the daughter of Thomas Porter. I once sided with Ruth because I believed she loved me. But I have seen the videos my father left behind. In one, he said, "Think of Sarah." That was the same phrase Ruth used to stop my father from calling the police in 2015. I realize now, she wasn't protecting me. She was protecting herself. A heavy silence fell. Henderson started to speak, but Judge Keller held up a hand. That's enough. You may sit down. Then it was my turn. I stood, feeling my heart beat in time with the judge's gavel. Your Honor, I did not come here to fight over money. I came here to preserve the truth of a man who has died, my husband, Thomas. He left 365 videos, 6 packages, every file, every word. They all lead to one point. The truth doesn't disappear. It is only delayed. If Ruth were truly innocent, she would not have needed to file for temporary conservatorship before the investigation was complete. And if I am mad, then the laws of California grant me the right to be mad, the right to speak the truth. The courtroom was utterly still. Keller looked directly at me, then at Ruth. Mrs. Porter, she said, do you have anything to add? Ruth smiled faintly, her voice like honey. Your Honor, I only want this to end peacefully. I have lost a husband and a son, And now I am being accused by a disturbed woman. Suncrest is the legacy of the Porter family. I only wish to protect it from someone who is not competent. Keller arched an eyebrow. In what way incompetent? Ruth replied, psychologically, financially, and morally. I looked straight at her, saying nothing. Hayes gently pushed a folder toward the judge. Your Honor, this is a medical evaluation report. Mrs. Elaine Porter is fully lucid, with no signs of any psychological disorder. Meanwhile, according to tax records, Mrs. Ruth Porter has transferred $136 million from the Suncrest Foundation to her personal accounts. The room erupted in murmurs. For a moment, Ruth lost her composure. Henderson shot to his feet. Objection! That financial information has not been authenticated. Keller struck her gavel. Objection is invalid. The evidence is legal and has been confirmed by the state auditing agency. 3 hours later, the hearing concluded. Keller read the preliminary ruling. The Sonoma County Court denies the request for temporary conservatorship of the Suncrest Vineyard filed by Mrs. Ruth Porter. The court will also forward this file to the state attorney's office to open a criminal investigation into the 1995 death of Mr. Porter Sr. The Suncrest Foundation and Suncrest Vineyard will be temporarily overseen by Mrs. Elaine Porter with the assistance of the state auditing agency. The sound of the gavel was like a final decisive cut. Ruth jumped to her feet, her face ashen. You will all regret this. Keller looked down at her, her voice calm. Mrs. Porter, justice knows no regrets. It only knows its duty. Stepping out of the courthouse, the afternoon sun spilled onto the stone steps. Sarah held my hand tightly. Did we really win, Mom? Not yet. This is just the first sliver of light. Hayes walked beside us, a small smile on his face. You've just given one of the most powerful women in California a sleepless night. Now you need to rest. I replied softly, when justice rests, I will rest. That night, I returned to Suncrest. In the darkness, each grapevine glistened with dew, like the eyes of a witness. I sat in the study, turned on the old desk lamp, and its yellow light fell on the wall where Thomas's picture hung. Thomas, I said quietly, she has lost her power, and as for me, I am just getting started. 3 days after the hearing, Suncrest was unusually quiet. No more reporters, no Henderson, only the wind, heavy with the scent of grapes and old ash. Sarah stayed with me. That morning, she was clearing out a storage room on the second floor, a room Ruth had used on her last visit. It was small, with old wooden floors and a window that looked out onto the St. Violet Hill. Everything was suspiciously neat, except for a locked, dark wood cabinet. Do you want to break it open? I asked. Sarah looked at the key on the table, the wooden key carved in the shape of a teardrop that I'd found in Thomas's final package. This key fits, she said. The sound of the click was soft, like the fateful joining of two pieces of a puzzle. Inside the drawer, there were no gold bars, no bank documents, just an old tin box tied with a faded ribbon. On the lid, in handwritten script, Martha, 1989. Sarah fell silent. I carefully opened the lid. Inside was a collection of black and white photographs, a few old letters, and a birth certificate folded into quarters. The certificate was faded, the ink yellowed, but the words were still clear. Mother's name, Martha Green. Father's name, Thomas Porter Sr. Child's name, Thomas Green Porter. Year of birth, 1967. Sarah let out a sharp breath. Martha Green? I replied slowly. Green was her maiden name. It was also the alias Ruth used when she founded E.G. Comp R. Green. Sarah's voice trembled. So Ruth wasn't Dad's real mother? I nodded. She was his stepmother, and Martha was his real mother, the one who was replaced. We continued to look through the letters. They were all handwritten, the script fine and slanted. The first was dated June 12, 1989, the same year Thomas first left Suncrest for college. My dearest Thomas, when you read this, I may have already had to leave Suncrest. They say I am weak, tired, but you know I am not one to give up easily. It's just that sometimes there are things you cannot fight: power, money, and fear. Ruth comes from that world. She knows how to make people believe her. If one day you find that Suncrest smells different, trust the smell of the earth, not the ledgers." The next letter was shorter. "Don't be afraid to love, but don't let anyone define love for you. If they make you choose between being a porter and the light of Saint Violet, choose the light, because it is you." Sarah began to cry. "Dad kept all these letters, but he never said who wrote them." I nodded. "He was afraid. He thought if he told, Ruth would hurt you, but he left us every piece so you could find it for yourself." At the bottom of the box was an old color photograph. Martha and Thomas, a boy of about 8, mixing soil in a wooden planter. Martha was leaning down, her hands covered in dirt, a bright smile on her face. The caption on the back read, "First planting, Saint Violet, our own soil." Sarah gently touched the picture, her tears falling onto the paper. "Dad grew up here, and I grew up in a lie." "No," I said softly. "You grew up in the true legacy. You just hadn't seen it yet." That night, Sarah didn't sleep. I heard her rustling through papers in her room all night, her whispers mingling with the sound of the wind. Just before dawn, she knocked on my door. "Mom," she said, her voice hoarse from crying, "I understand now. Ruth didn't just kill Grandpa. She killed Dad's memory." I looked at my daughter and saw that her eyes were no longer filled with tears, only a quiet, purple light. "We'll take these letters to Hayes," I said. "No," Sarah replied. "Let me do it. I want to be the one to hand over the truth about her to the law." The next morning, we met Hayes at the sheriff's office. Sarah placed the tin box on the table and opened it. Hayes read each document, then looked up. "This is evidence of identity fraud. Ruth Porter not only used Martha's name to legitimize documents, but she also falsified her blood relationship to inherit the foundation." He looked at me. "Do you know what this means?" "It means that all ownership rights Ruth gained from the marriage could be nullified, and the foundation will revert to Martha's legacy." Hayes nodded. "I'll forward this to the state prosecutor, but," he paused, "prepare yourself. When a powerful person has nothing left to lose, they tend to burn everything down." That evening, Sarah and I returned to Suncrest. A light rain was falling. The porch light cast a reflection on a puddle, spreading out in a purple sheen like spilled wine. Sarah stood by the window looking out at the vineyard. "Mom," she said quietly, "she used to tell me that Martha ran off with another man, that Dad erased her name out of shame. I understand now. She lied not to cover up a crime, but to rewrite history." I came to her side and placed a hand on her shoulder. "But the truth can't be rewritten forever, my dear. It just lies dormant, waiting for someone brave enough to turn the page again." Sarah turned and hugged me tightly. For the first time, I felt that her embrace was no longer that of a frightened child, but of someone standing tall in the eye of a storm. After she had gone to sleep, I returned to my desk and opened my investigation journal. Entry 11, The Truth About Martha, Birth Certificate, 1989 letters. Ruth impersonated the biological mother to legitimize her inheritance. Martha Green Porter, Thomas's birth mother. Martha's letters equals evidence of premeditated malice, confirming Ruth's manipulation since 1989. Sarah has accepted the truth, ready to be a witness. I placed Martha's photograph on the desk. In the yellow lamplight, her smile was gentle, warm, almost as if she were looking at me. "We're going to give you your name back," I said. That night, the sky over Suncrest was as dark as a swath of purple velvet. Sarah and I sat before a large screen, its blue light illuminating our faces. The 6th USB, videos from day 151 to day 210, was the part Thomas had never sent me while he was alive. He had recorded them in a weak voice, but every word was clear, as if he feared running out of time. I pressed play. Video, day 151. Thomas sat in his old study, wearing a gray cardigan, his eyes sunken. The yellow light made his skin look pale. "Elaine," If you're watching this, it means I've run out of time. I know you. You won't sit still. You'll go looking for Suncrest. You'll turn over every stone. But Suncrest, right now, is not our home. It's a tinderbox. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze serious, yet gentle. There's a clause in the contract, Clause 4.3, temporary custodianship activation. If any member of the Porter family sets foot on Suncrest, while Ruth holds temporary conservatorship, the sale clause is triggered. One signature, one footstep, and the entire estate falls into the hands of the Fletcher Group. I didn't forbid you out of anger, but out of love, because I knew you couldn't bear to see what I was seeing. Ruth had already signed the transfer papers, just waiting for you to make a mistake. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. I squeezed her hand tightly. Video, day 162. Thomas was weaker. Behind him, the window opened onto the vineyard hills. The wind rustled the curtains, its sound mingling with the beat of his heart. I tried to nullify that clause, but Fletcher's lawyers believed Ruth, not me. The Alzheimer's made them suspect I had lost my mind. I recorded every one of these videos to prove it. Memory may fade, but reason remains intact. I needed someone to see the logic, not just believe the words. He held up a piece of paper. The very contract I now had in the war folder. His finger pointed to the line, option to acquire, automatically executed upon custodianship. A trap. One signature, and if you had come to Suncrest any sooner, we would have lost everything. He gave a small, tired laugh. I know you'll be angry, that you'll think I didn't trust you, but love isn't always about sharing. Sometimes it's about protecting with silence. I felt my throat tighten. Sarah squeezed my hand harder. Video, day 180. Thomas sat in the garden, the late afternoon light on his face. Beside him was the cracked St. Violet glass, the same one I now kept. I used to sit here with Martha, my mother. She said, "Don't let Suncrest swallow your soul, Thomas." I didn't understand until I met Ruth, and realized that some people don't own land to grow grapes, but to bury the truth. If I lose, let you win. If I am silent, let you speak. He paused, took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. Elaine, I know I will go first. The heart condition won't wait, but I believe that when you've received all 6 packages, you will understand that I didn't abandon you. I just kept you out of the blast radius. After the explosion is over, go in and clear the ashes, because then the soil of Suncrest will be clean. The screen went black for a few seconds. Then the video changed. Day 210. Thomas was sitting by the window, the sun shining on his graying hair. Sarah, if you're watching this with your mother, don't hate her. Adults sometimes choose silence because they know they aren't strong enough to endure one more pain. I forbade your mother from coming to Suncrest to keep her away from Ruth, and I kept Ruth by my side to keep the evidence from being burned. It was the most painful thing I've ever done, but love doesn't always take the form of an embrace. Sometimes it's the space someone leaves behind, so you have room to live. He looked down, smiled, and closed his eyes. The golden light flooded the frame like a frozen sunset. The video ended. Sarah was crying. Not loudly, just silent tears falling onto the keyboard. I sat still, my hands trembling. Every question, every doubt over the past 2 months dissolved into quiet understanding. He hadn't forbidden me out of mistrust. He had forbidden me to keep me out of the trap. Thomas hadn't died a victim. He had died as a man executing one last plan for justice. I whispered, he wasn't hiding from me. He was standing between me and the fire. Sarah looked up, her eyes red. Dad saw further than any of us. Yes, I said. And now it's our turn to walk the rest of that path. I opened my investigation journal and wrote in a steady hand, Entry 12, Videos 151-210, The Reason for Suncrest. Clause 4. 3. Confirms automatic sale provision if Elaine enters Suncrest under Ruth's conservatorship. Thomas forbade Elaine to protect the estate from the option clause being triggered. Videos validate Thomas's cognitive faculties in his final days. Emotional and legal evidence is strong enough to refute all of Ruth's allegations. I looked out at the garden, the night blanketing each vine, the silver moonlight shimmering on the wet earth. A soft breeze blew, carrying the scent of St. Violet wine mixed with mist. In that moment, I felt it clearly. Thomas was still here, not in the videos, but in the very land he had protected with his silence. The air at Suncrest that day was thick with moisture, the smell of the earth rising intensely. I held the wooden key carved in the shape of a teardrop, the last item from the 6th package Thomas had left. The key's face was engraved with the words, "Pipe Room." Lucia stood beside me, her expression worried. "Are you sure? That old cellar has been sealed since 1996. No one has been down there since." "I need to see what Thomas wanted me to see." I switched on my flashlight. The yellow beam cut across the concrete steps. A wave of cold air washed up from below like a human breath. The cellar door was heavy and rusted. I inserted the key and turned. Click. A dry, sharp sound echoed through the corridor. Inside, it was pitch black. The mingled smells of damp metal, old wine, earth, and ash filled the air. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with a dense network of copper pipes like blood vessels. Lucia pointed to a far corner. That used to be the auxiliary pipe for venting excess CO2. After the gas leak, Ruth had the whole system sealed off, said it was for safety. I swept the light across the walls. Mildew bloomed in patterns like scorch marks. In the center of the room was a small iron cabinet, locked with a chain. A rusty plaque on its door read, "Maintenance Log 1995. Lucia whispered, "Thomas once mentioned there was an old security camera down here, but no one ever found it. Maybe it's in there." I took bolt cutters to the chain. The snap echoed off the damp walls. The cabinet door creaked open. Inside, a single videotape, labeled with a shaky marker. Harvest Night, 1995. I brought the box up to the technical inspection room on the upper floor. Lucia called Detective Hayes. He arrived within the hour, bringing an old tape player with him. We sat together in the darkened room, the only light coming from the desk lamp shining on the equipment. Hayes put on gloves and inserted the tape. The old gears whirred softly, and then the tape began to play. The screen flickered to life with a grainy, black and white image. A corner of the cellar appeared. Pipes, fermentation tanks, a blinking pressure gauge. The camera angle was high and static, clearly from a security feed. Then, a figure appeared. It was a man in work clothes, Porter Sr. Porter. He was bent over, checking a secondary valve, a wrench in his hand. The dim light reflected off the gauge. The pressure needle was jumping erratically. He leaned in to adjust it. Behind him, in the right corner of the screen, another figure moved. It was blurry, very blurry, but it was clearly a woman. Her hair was in a bun, her figure tall, wearing a light-colored coat. She stopped in front of the valve cabinet, holding a small vial. Hayes whispered, "Stop. Zoom in." My hand shaking, I paused the image. On the woman's collar, a glint of reflected light, a round brooch, engraved with the letter R. Lucia gasped. My God, Ruth always wore that set. The gold brooches, a wedding gift from 1990. The tape continued. The woman bent down and attached the vial to the secondary valve. A single drop of liquid flowed in, and then she turned and vanished into the shadows. Less than a minute later, Porter Sr. returned. He checked the valve, looked up, and then collapsed. The screen shook violently, then went black. No sound. Only the soft clicking of the tape player's gears and the pounding of my own heart. The room was silent for a long time. Hayes removed the tape, his face pale but his eyes bright. "Elaine, this is the first piece of physical evidence. It's undeniable." "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Positive. We're taking this to the state forensics lab right now. If it's authenticated, this is the first recorded and buried murder in the history of the California wine industry." That night, I sat in the car with Hayes on the way to Sacramento. Outside, rain fell in heavy sheets. the headlights reflected on the windshield in white streaks. A fear was growing inside me, not of Ruth, but of the price of the truth. Once it was revealed, none of us could ever go back. Hayes spoke quietly. Thomas was right. He left a complete map, and he trusted you would have the courage to follow it to the end. I replied in a low voice, "It's not courage, it's a debt. A debt to him, to Martha, and to myself." 3 days later, the forensic report arrived. The analysis confirmed the tape was an original from 1995, with no signs of editing. The residual chemical in the glass vial contained pure ethylene glycol, and the image of the brooch was a match to a brooch Ruth Porter was photographed wearing in her 1990 wedding photos. The report concluded, "The video evidence is authentic and provides sufficient grounds to press first-degree murder charges." I put the report down, my hands trembling. Sarah was speechless. Patrick began to cry, not from pain, but from relief. That evening, I went out to the Vineyard Hills. The wind was strong, carrying the smell of earth and metal. I looked down at the old cellar, the place where Thomas had recorded his final video message. I understood now. He didn't just want me to see the truth. He wanted me to hear it, in the sounds of metal, of breath, of videotape. Lucia came and stood beside me, her voice trembling. "Do you think Ruth knew the tape still existed?" I shook my head. If she had, it would have been burned long ago. Thomas must have hidden another copy, just in case I couldn't find this one. The next morning, the news exploded. The front-page headline, "New Evidence in 1995 Suncrest Case. Original video confirms Ruth Porter at scene." The community was divided. Half of the foundation's shareholders demanded an independent investigation. Hayes called me. "The state attorney has approved the file. The court will hold an extended hearing next week. You should prepare yourself. Ruth might flee, or she might fight back." I replied, "I'm not afraid. I'm only afraid that one day the soil of Suncrest will be covered by silence again." That night, I watched the video for day 250, the last one Thomas recorded before he died. He was sitting in the dark, the light from a screen illuminating half of his face. "Elaine, if you've made it to the pipe room, it means you're strong enough to face it. I don't expect you to forgive Ruth. I only hope you can forgive yourself for trusting the wrong person for so long. When the light shines down into that cellar, remember, light doesn't seek out sin. It only seeks an end." I stopped the video, burying my head in my hands, my tears falling silently. Outside, the rain began to fall again. Cold, clear, and clean. I wrote in my investigation journal, "Day 13, Pipe Room, Harvest 1995 video. Found original tape proving Ruth was at the scene. Brooch matches 1990 sample. EG chemical matches 2015 sample. State Forensics Lab confirms. Evidence sufficient for indictment. Preparing for extended hearing." Then I added a smaller line, in italics. "Thomas, you won. Not with fire, but with light." The Sacramento State Courthouse, early March morning. The corridors were long, lit by a cold, blue neon glow. The sound of my shoes echoed on the stone floor. I walked into the courtroom, my heart beating slowly but steadily. Ruth was already there. She wore a white suit, her hair in a neat bun, and was wearing the gold brooches, the very set that had glinted in the 1995 tape. Her eyes no longer held their familiar power, only the flat, hard look of someone accustomed to lies. In the back row, Patrick sat silently, his hands clenched. Beside him, Sarah held Martha's letters. Detective Hayes stood next to me, a thick file before him. Judge Eleanor Briggs, known for her impartiality, sat high on the bench and struck her gavel. The extended hearing for the Suncrest case, the 1995 retrial, is now in session. Henderson, Ruth's lawyer, began. "Your Honor, these allegations are based on old videotapes, emotional speculation, and the testimony of individuals with personal grudges. My client, Mrs. Pass. Ruth Porter has dedicated her life to Suncrest, built the foundation from ashes, and is now being scapegoated for a vendetta." He turned to me. "Mrs. Porter, you lost your husband. and in your grief, you have invented an enemy. Perhaps your obsession is the strongest evidence against you." I didn't respond. Hayes gave a slight nod. It was his turn to rise, his voice low and sharp. "Your Honor, justice is not an invention. It comes with invoices, signatures, and videotapes, and today we present them all." He projected the 1995 tape onto the screen. The black and white image flickered. Porter Sr. bent over the valve. Then, the figure entered, the glass vial, the glint of the gold brooch. The entire room held its breath. As the image of Ruth leaning over the valve appeared, Henderson shot up. "Objection! The video is blurry. Identity cannot be confirmed." Hayes coolly replied, "The State Forensics Lab has confirmed it, with a 98.7% facial recognition match. The brooch matches a sample owned by Ruth Porter. Original evidence, 1990. It cannot be faked." Judge Briggs nodded. "Noted for the record." Ruth gave a small smile, her voice as sweet as melting ice. "You really want to believe that blurry image? After 30 years, human memory fails, let alone a camera." Hayes replied, "We don't just have an image. We have a money trail, letters, and testimony." Patrick stood up. He was trembling, but his voice was firm. "I am Patrick Porter. I was there. That night. I saw my mother go down into the cellar. I heard my father call out, then silence. For 30 years I kept quiet, because she told me, 'Think of Patrick. Today, I am thinking of him.'" Ruth turned, her face darkening, her eyes blazing. "Patrick, you don't understand anything. I did it for the family. For you." "No," Patrick said, tears streaming down his face. "You did it for power, and power has never been family." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sarah walked to the stand, holding Martha's letters. "Your Honor, these are letters written in 1989, with their signatures authenticated by the Sonoma County Archives. Martha Green Porter was the biological mother of Thomas Porter, Mrs. Elaine Porter's husband. Ruth Porter used a false identity to legitimize her inheritance of the foundation, and used the name R. Green to found the company E.G. Comp. The judge asked, "Do you have proof of the connection between Ruth Porter and E.G. Comp?" Hayes projected a copy of the company's registration onto the screen, pointing to the last line, "Director, Ruth Green Porter." Briggs nodded. "Understood." Henderson tried to argue. "The court has no proof that Ruth directly poisoned her husband. This is all just a coincidence." Hayes replied, "A coincidence does not last for 30 years across 3 wineries with the same chemical." Ruth lost her composure, her voice rising. "You people don't understand. I saved Suncrest. Without me, the foundation would have collapsed." Briggs looked at her directly. "And to save it, you killed a man?" She fell silent. A long moment passed, as if time itself had stopped. Then Ruth spoke, her voice choked, half confession, half justification. "They were weak. Martha was weak. Porter Sr. was weak. Thomas was weak. I just did what they didn't have the courage to do. I chose survival. Without me, Suncrest would have died in 1995. The words fell, heavy as lead. The courtroom was still. No one said another word. Judge Briggs lowered her gaze to the file, then struck her gavel. The court notes Mrs. Ruth Porter's statement as an indirect confession, based on the physical evidence, financial records, and witness testimony. This court denies all legal claims made by Mrs. Ruth Porter, forwards this case to the state attorney's office for indictment on charges of first-degree murder, and freezes all assets of Porter Holdings and the Suncrest Foundation pending trial. The gavel struck 3 times. Final. Ruth collapsed into her chair. Henderson bowed his head, gathering his files in silence. Sarah was crying. Patrick buried his face in his hands. Hayes just looked at me and gave a slight nod. As I left the courtroom, a strong wind blew through the corridor. I paused by a window, looking out at the bright Sacramento skyline. The sun shone through the glass, casting a pale purple light, the color of Saint Violet, on my hair. I remembered Thomas's words, "Light doesn't seek out sin, it seeks an end." And today, that light had found it. That afternoon, we returned to Suncrest. Sarah stood on the hill, holding Martha's letter. "Mom," she said, "Dad won." I replied, "No, the truth won. Your father was just the one who planted the seed." Hayes left with only one sentence. "Justice is never fast, but it always arrives on time." Patrick looked at me, his eyes full of relief. "I'm going to stay at Suncrest, not to own it, but to remember," I smiled. Suncrest finally has a proper caretaker. Night. I sat in Thomas's study and opened the window. The night air drifted in, carrying the scent of wine and earth. The cracked crystal glass was still on the desk. I poured a glass of wine and raised it. "Thomas," I said softly, "we've reached the end. There's nothing left to hide. And in this silence, I can hear you smiling." 3 months after the trial, Suncrest was quietly reborn. The bare vines of early spring began to sprout new buds. The smell of fresh earth, of water, of sun, the smell Thomas once said you could hear memories in. We sat in his old office. Sarah was going through the foundation's files, her father's handwriting still neat and steady. Patrick stood by the window, looking out at the vineyard. They were no longer two people on opposite sides of a war, but two halves of a legacy pieced back together. That day, I officially announced the reestablishment of the foundation, its new name, the Martha Green Trust. Its mission: to fund Alzheimer's research, support scholarships for agricultural students, and preserve the St. Violet grape varietal. As I signed the document, I said, "This is not just the Porter family's foundation. It is a foundation for everyone who has ever been forgotten." A reporter asked, "Do you think Thomas would be proud?" I smiled. He didn't like the word proud. He would have said, "We're just returning what we once borrowed from the light." That afternoon, we held a harvest of truth at Suncrest. There was no fine wine, no distinguished guests, only the people who had worked here, the ones who had witnessed both the darkness and the light. Lucia brought the first buds of the season and placed them on the table like a blessing. Hayes stood quietly in the back, holding a glass of water, not wine. Sarah gave a short speech, her voice clear and strong. "My father used to say that every grape has its own soul, if only someone believes it can ripen. Today, I believe that, and I believe the same is true for every person." Patrick spoke next. 30 years ago, Suncrest was a place where a crime was buried. Today, it is a place where trust is replanted. My mother, Ruth, lost everything, but she still taught me one thing. Power can take everything away, except the chance to make amends. I am staying here to grow grapes, not for money but for time. I stood up last. I didn't have a prepared speech. I just said, "Thomas always believed that the truth doesn't save anyone, but it gives people the chance to live authentically. And that is what he did, for us." After the ceremony, I returned to the old study. On the desk was the last USB drive, labeled Day 365. I plugged it into the laptop. The screen lit up, showing Thomas's face. Thin, but his eyes were peaceful. "Elaine, if you are watching this, it means you have completed the journey. I don't know if you won or lost, but I believe you didn't give up, and that is enough. You once asked me what the most important thing in life was. I thought about it for a long time, and now I know the answer. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. Every day we choose to stay, to forgive, to trust each other one more time. And when we make that choice, we have already won, no matter the outcome." He smiled and gently raised a glass of wine. "St. Violet never tastes the same 2 seasons in a row because it is alive, just like love, just like you." He paused, then said his last words, his voice very soft. "If anyone asks, tell them I didn't leave behind a fortune. I left behind light, and light is something no one can inherit." The screen went black. I sat in silence, tears falling without a sound. On the desk, the setting sun shone through the cracked crystal glass. The light passed through the crack, splitting into 2 purple beams, then merging back into one. Sarah came in and sat beside me. "Mom, did Dad leave any more letters?" I nodded and took an old, unopened envelope from the drawer. On it, in Martha's handwriting, "For the one who will continue." I held it, gently stroking the edge. "Perhaps it's not time yet," I said. "Some truths should be kept, not to be hidden, but to be found at the right moment." Sarah took my hand, smiling through her tears. "Dad would have liked the way you said that." Night fell. Suncrest was bathed in moonlight, the young grape clusters glistening with dew. The wind whispered over the hills like a gentle, contented sigh. I stepped out onto the porch, poured a glass of St. Violette, and looked toward the distance, where the pipe room had once been a place of darkness. Now it was just an empty patch of land overgrown with green grass. I raised my glass. "Thomas, we have harvested the season of truth." And in the gentle breeze I heard him reply, "Then let us begin the season of peace."